So I'd also like to pay my respect to the traditional owners, the Mirror out at Jabiru, and the Larrakia people here in Darwin, and their elders past, present and emerging. The work we do at Range is very important to the Mirror people, and you'll hear some of that as we go forward. So today I'm going to talk about the Range uranium mine and what we do at the Supervising Scientist Branch to research and monitor that mine. And I really want to talk about the national benefits of a quadripartite approach that we have for protecting what is a World Heritage Estate. So a bit of an overview of the presentation. I'll give you a slide on my research career and how I got here. I'll talk about Kakadu and the wonderful tropical top end where I am. And we'll talk about uranium and its importance to the context of the NT and everything that's happening up in Darwin in the past and currently. So I'll talk about the Fox report, which was a inquiry that led to the formation of the Supervising Scientist Branch. And I'll talk about the different uranium mines in the region, the Ranger mine, and all the good work that we've done for the aquatic ecosystems there, the water quality objectives, the toxicity tests we've developed, the monitoring that we do, and how that all aligns with the National Water Quality Management Framework. I'll talk about our biological monitoring program, and there's some really good work that we're doing now and for the future. I want to drop in to some of the other teams that we have here at SSB because they're doing some fantastic research. So in a nutshell, I want to provide you some of the context and the background of why Ranger came about and show that the history of it and all the research that we've done to this stage has really assisted with advancing some tools and technologies that have much broader applications than just this one mine in Kakadu. So my research career, I was an RMIT undergraduate student studying biology, biotechnology. I did an honours year in not ecotoxicology, but the immunotoxicity of workplace chemicals. Learned pretty quickly that I didn't want to work with mice after that year. I spent 2 years in a commercial IVF lab straight after Dolly was born, and I seriously sucked eggs from ovaries as a living. And that was enough to tell me to go back to university and do a PhD. And I was lucky enough to do one ecotoxicology one, looking at the immunotoxicity of chemical in native fishes. And that's a young-looking me holding a spleen, and that was my tool at the time. Anyone that does flow cytometry might remember that dinosaur. It's a bit big as a room. Ours is now the size of a box of beer or something like that. So I did a little bit of time doing a postdoc in human health risk assessment and studying the immunotoxicity of nanomaterials. I did that to just have a job. I needed to follow the money and where the research dollars were. But then I was lucky enough to have a 9-month contract come up with Eris. So I came up 13 and a half years ago and never went back to that nanomaterial program back at RMIT University. So I'm the current president of CTAC Australasia. One of the good things, or something I really like about CTAC is that it has this tripartite philosophy that says that when academia, government and industry work together, we achieve better environmental outcomes. And the reason I like that is because that's a lot about what Ranger does. And I'll explain that as I go through this presentation. So what did I leave Melbourne for? Well, it's a beautiful environment up here, and Kakadu is certainly the focus of our work. We're in the wet, dry tropics. We get a lot of rain, we hope, most years. We've had a couple of bad wet seasons, but on average, we get about 1,700 millimetres of rain. We've had some good storms lately, so we're all hopeful for another good year. So it's a dynamic landscape, definitely driven by the flow of water coming in and out. So there's very distinct wet and dry seasons that change the environment as those flows start happening. There's a spectacular escarpment. It's 300 metres high, and on top of that, the Arnhem Land Plateau. And because of these cultural, geological and biological features, the Kakadu was listed in as a World Heritage Estate. And it's also listed as under a wetland of international significance under the Ramsar Convention. So what was going on in Darwin and Kakadu in the 70s? So nearly almost 46 years ago, Cyclone Tracy hit Darwin. And a year after that, there was a population of 32,000. So, you know, still like today, the federal government and Darwin's strategic position meant the federal government wanted more of a population in Darwin. For economies, there was hunting and fishing economies, there was wildlife sanctuaries, and I've thrown up this map I found quite interesting. Some of these pink areas there. Can you see my mouse, my arrow? I'm not sure if you can. Anyway, there's some pink areas, but the broad areas are all those light blue areas of all pastoral leases. So there's a vast extent of pastoral leases and some cattle and buffalo farming. But in the 70s, there were still many people, as there are today, living traditional lifestyles in Arnhem Land, but in the areas surrounding Darwin. And there was a lot of regulatory government type movement going on in the 70s. We had the Aboriginal land rights come into play in 1976. NT was granted what is called responsible government in 1978. So that's not necessarily independence, but it's its own legislative assembly, and we have the chief minister. That all came in 1978. Kakadu was declared a national park. There should be a park there in 1979. And the office of the Supervising Scientist was also established in that same year. And a lot of the movement was due to uranium. So it's a strategic commodity after World War II. Obviously, we had the first nuclear bombs dropped, and then the arms race after that. So to fuel that arms race, they needed uranium. And here, this is a real flyer for uranium reward that was in 1948 for £25,000. It was quite a lot of money in the day, and that's actually rewarded to someone that discovered the jungle deposit. So we had our own bit of, the arms race, not only in the mining and supplying of uranium, but Maralinga, of course, infamously was a test site. And it continued to be a controversial commodity, of course, because it ends up in nuclear bombs, but also we had nuclear accidents in the 70s and 80s at 3 Mile and Chernobyl. And of course of that, we had things like Jabiluka protests when there was an attempt to mine that place in 1998, and some pretty extreme actions with the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior, which was protesting French testing of nuclear weapons in the South Pacific. That happened in New Zealand in 1985. So it was also a very valuable commodity in the 1970s. So in the 60s and 70s, there was a ramp up of these nuclear reactors, both in Europe and the States. There's still 100 at least, I believe, nuclear power reactors in the States that are from that era. And because of that ramping up of nuclear power industry, the uranium price hit an all-time high in 1974 and stayed fairly high for those years. So there was a large economic driver behind getting uranium mining happening, and part of that was so that this new responsible government of the NT could actually fund its existence in some ways, and the population growth that they wanted in the NT would be associated with that as well. So in 1975, the Whitlam government knew there was a lot of opposition to uranium mining because of mostly concerns with the arms race. And they had Justice Russell Fox form a committee and look into the proposal for mining within the Alligator Rivers region. So it was the Fox report that came up with this term. They had terms of reference, and there's some maps in there that they drew up about where they would actually look at. And it was because of these deposits at Ranger, Jabiluka, Narbarlek and Kungara. I'll show where they are a little bit later. So the team, Fox's team, were in examining all aspects of the surroundings of man. It was 1975. I'm sure they meant women as well. Whether affecting him as an individual or his social groupings. That was the term that they used for environment. So it was quite broad. And they also really went quite broad when it was looking at the focus on the opposition to nuclear industry in general. And they also covered issues of land rights in the region. So it was a far-reaching review. And the main finding of that was that if uranium mining was properly regulated and controlled, its hazards were not sufficient to prevent the development of the mines. So certainly didn't make everyone happy, that sort of an idea. So there was some definitely, offsets for that, payoffs for that. And one of them was this establishment of a comprehensive system of environmental monitoring and research, overseen by a coordinating committee representing all the agencies involved and chaired by supervising scientists. So at the same time that they were allowing uranium mining to go ahead in this unique part of the world, they also were offering native title to the Aboriginal people to substantial parts of the region. And they also made a lot of the region into Kakadu National Park. And of course, that didn't include the leases that they were looking at, the Jabiluka, Ranger, Narbarlek and Kungara leases. So they passed the Act, the Environmental Protection Act of the Alligator Rivers Region in 1978, and in 1979 the Supervising Scientist was established as a statutory office. And part of that was to have a supporting research institute. At the time they called it the Alligator Rivers Region Institute. I believe that sign's still up at Jabiru if you go and have a look, but we are now called the Environmental Research Institute of the Supervising Scientist, more fondly known as ERIS, I guess. So the Supervising Scientist Branch that I work for has and had the broad objective of protecting the Alligator Rivers region and the local communities from the effects of uranium mining. So we do that through undertaking research and conducting monitoring. We develop standards and practices for environmental protection, and we oversee and participate in the regulatory processes. We are not the regulator, we provide advice to the regulator, but we are not the regulator. So the functions listed in that Act also say that the supervising scientist can advise the federal minister on general mining in a conservation area or other environmental matters outside the region. So it leaves it pretty broad and open. So the other thing we do is engage with the international stakeholders, certainly the International Atomic Energy Agency and the IUCN, for the fact that we are protecting a World Heritage Estate. So here are the uranium mines and a little bit of history too. So in the 50s, they were mining already uranium in this area that they call the South Alligator Valley. So there's a few photos there. Some of them are very old, you know, the 50s. So there's a photo there of a 1 ton of pitch blend, which is uranium ore, and some of the old campsites. But that's a photo of a place called Coronation Hill when it was mined. I think it's about 59, that photo. Another deposit that became famous a few years back because this man, Jeffrey Lee, So he didn't want uranium mining there. He wanted it to go back into the park. That's Kungara. It was part of the Fox report. There was a lease there, and it was that lease that Jeffrey Lee convinced the federal government to put back into Kakadu National Park. Narbarlek is a mine outside Kakadu, but within the Alligator Rivers region. It was mined from 79 to 88. They pulled the ore out of that really quickly, and they spent a number of years milling it. It's been rehabilitated and, you know, to very varying degrees of success on that site. But it's a site we're interested in and we monitor. Jabiluka, of course, there was lots of protests in the late 90s about this place. There was a decline dug. Mining didn't really occur there, but there was a retention pond that's shown in those photographs that's been rehabilitated and revegetated. The photo down there at the bottom is the portal to the decline. So that lease is north of the Ranger mine, which is the one that we are most interested in, I guess. So that ore body was discovered in late '69. Most of those ore bodies were discovered around that time. It's an ore body that stretches, or you know, there's mineralization that stretches. If you draw a line from the South Alligator Valley all the way up to north to Narbarlek, you can sort of see where that mineralization sort of runs. And so there's been lots of exploration around those areas over the years. So at the moment, the Ranger mine's the only operating mine in the region. So milling will finish very soon in January 2021. So that's the official end of operations. And then we're into rehabilitation, although rehabilitation is happening and has been happening since they exhausted resources in Pit 3 in 2012. But the mining lease ends in 2026 when rehabilitation is scheduled to be completed. So it's definitely the largest mine in the region. It was one of the largest mines in the world. At one stage, it was supplying a third of the world's uranium oxide. And it's been authorised under a piece of legislation called the Atomic Energy Act. And associated with that act is a bunch of environmental requirements with which the mine must comply. I won't go into detail about those, but you can find them on our website. They're an interesting piece of legislation. So I want to mention the cultural spiritual values of the site. So it's located on the traditional lands of the Mirror people, and it's been dated to over 60,000 years. I think I've heard 65,000, but when you read the Fox report, it was 20,000. So who knows where it'll be after another 40 years. There is deep spiritual connections with the land and especially the water. In the National Water Quality Guidelines, we have this statement that says, water is protected by law. It's in the songs, the dances, the dreaming stories, and the artworks. Water must be of a sufficient quality and quantity to sustain cultural values. So there's some really nice cultural value guidance within those ANZG guidelines. So go check them out. So really what the traditional owners have wanted since mining has been conducted on their land is to recommence their traditional hunter-gatherer practices and their ceremonial practices on the site. Because of this, their aquatic bush foods, the mussels, the fish, the crocodiles, totem species, they're highly valued to the Mirror people out there. So on the mine site, Magilla Creek, and there's two on-site billabongs, one called Kinjimba, the other one called Georgetown. They're two key features that will encourage the return of traditional practices on that site. And there are some sacred sites present on the lease where undoubtedly they'd want to conduct ceremony. Cultural criteria have been set for the Ranger mine, and the mine will do what they can to address those cultural criteria as they decommission the mine. So the title mentions a quadripartite approach, and I just wanted to point out this is how it exists. We've got the industry, the operator of the mine. We've got the government. The regulator of the mine is actually the Northern Territory government, but that's a delegated role from the federal government because it is under the Atomic Energy Act. So it's some of these, it's a little bit old, this. Of course, we've had some changes in government department names. That happens. So the Department of Industry delegated that task to the Department of Primary Industries and Resources in the NT. So the research side of thing is us here at the Supervising Scientists, but also all our collaborators. So we don't operate in isolation. We have a lot of good collaborations, and even the mine have their own research and study going on. So it's not fair just to say that we're the only researchers within ERIS doing the science work. But just to show you, and here we have the traditional owners part of this stakeholder and regulatory framework. So it is a quadripartite approach. It doesn't mean that we're all got the same view on the same page, but it does mean that we negotiate, and through those negotiations, you'd hope that we get the best environmental outcome for the area. And here's a great way to show how we actually use that approach. So it was a while ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, our technical committee, RTEC, the Alligator Rivers Region Technical Committee, they had to identify the key knowledge needs, especially as we're coming up to closure and decommissioning. So they wanted that in a risk framework, and we set about with a project to do that. And they really wanted that to increase the transparency for the decisions being made and the direction of the research projects. And it's been very useful because those conceptual models that we devised in that process, they are very good for using them for knowledge management. They scaffolds for knowledge management. There's a nice paper that talks about how you can use these models, and those models are based on US EPA paradigms. So once you've got your right knowledge needs and things like that, it really helps focus resources in the right places. You can prioritize your projects well, and that's what we've done. So it is definitely a quadripartite approach in action. We had a lot of good stakeholder engagement and discussion about key issues. And at the end of the day, it was almost a risk perception type approach where, everyone's values and perceptions were put on the table and acknowledged. So through this risk assessment approach and project, we screened the risks for high and critical through risk ranking, risk scoring, for likelihood and consequence. And because of that, we could take those high and critical risks and identify what we knew about those risks and what we didn't know. Hence, the key knowledge needs fell out. We were able to assign those projects that would address those needs. We were able to prioritise the ones that were more important over the ones that were less of a risk based on those risk scores. And at the moment, we're going through those KKNs. We're systematically addressing them, and we've got a system to document what the knowledge was and how it was used in a decision, or how it might be used in a decision in the future. So, and it certainly provides some assurance that there's going to be an evidence-based decision-making approach when it comes to the closure of the mine, and that goes on record. It stays there. People can look at it in the future. And I remember having a conversation. We had an RTEC meeting not long ago, and there was semantics perhaps going around, and I said to the group, it's like, we need to get the wording right, because people will look back on this record and they need to understand what we were thinking for this decision. It's pretty important. So I want to talk about now some of the great work we've done within water and sediment quality team. And so this is a bit of the specifics about how we took those risk frameworks. A lot of them have existed, ever since day dot. So Fox, they recognised that there was going to be these risks of contaminants via the surface pathway. That's before the mine even started. So, and that's because we're in the wet, dry tropics and we've got a lot of water going around, and that you need to release water from the mines up here. Otherwise, they will just flow anyway. So, because of that, it was seen as a risk a long time ago, and people set about setting water quality objectives for the mine to manage those active discharges. Some unique context of the area is that escarpment and the plateau from which millions and millions of water run from, liters of water run from. It's very old. It consists of non-carbonate rock. There's a lot of it coming over the escarpment, and what happens is we get this very dilute solution of water coming down the creek. So, we're talking nearly pure water. It's very low EC, electrical conductivity. The pH is slightly acidic. We've got very little magnesium, calcium, and consequently hardness, and not a lot of dissolved organic carbon. And that combination of water quality means that, especially metals, it results in high bioavailability and toxicity. So some of the tox estimates that we derive in our lab, and even for things as benign as benign in other systems as magnesium sulfate, we have low toxicity estimates representing, high toxicity to the organisms. So not only that, we're in the tropics, right? So most of the standardized toxicity tests that were around at the time, in the early 80s, there were some. There was quite a few being developed for things like the pulp mills and down in Tassie and things like that. But ecotox is sort of coming up, but there was definitely no tropical freshwater species at that time. So over the last 40 years, and most of these were developed before I got here 13 years ago, but they've developed this suite of biological toxicity tests. We've got a fish, a snail, a freshwater mussel that was only developed in the last couple of years because we recognise it as important, potentially sensitive to a COPSI we were studying at the time, which was ammonia, and definitely important to the people culturally, and a key source of bush tucker out there. So we have an invertebrate, a zooplankton, Cladoceran species, our own little girl. Oh no, she is there. I thought I'd missed it, but it's Brad's face that's covering it. So we've got an aquatic macrophyte, a duckweed, like there's a temperate species for, and we've got a phytoplankton, a green alga that we use. So we use these in your traditional regulatory type ecotox testing. And that's been the foundation for our water quality guidelines for many years. We started off looking at uranium. Magnesium sulfate was a big focus for a while, but then we've systematically knocked off all the potential contaminants of concern we like to call COPSIs. If you hear me use that word, that's what it is. It's all the contaminants that may have an environmental impact, and we've done that now. They were used as operational limits to manage discharges, especially the one for magnesium, because it was the primary contaminant coming from the site. But they've now gone into what we call rehabilitation standards, and they're the benchmarks that we'll use to assess the achievement of closure, whether the mine's going to meet closure criteria. They have become the closure criteria, sorry. So the rehab standards, we recommend that to the mine, and they have put them in as closure criteria. So the magnesium site-specific guideline, that's also been validated with field and mesocosm studies. We've done a lot of work on magnesium over the years, and it was very comforting to see how well those ecotox tests predicted field and semi-field studies. And part of what I'm trying to talk about is how we benefit others, and we use these ecotox. We were approached by many operations up in the north here to help them with their own discharges and their own waste discharge licenses. We couldn't manage it all, so we shared those species with universities and other commercial ecotox laboratories, so that all these species could be used for much broader contexts other than Ranger. And we've also recently published all our protocols in a bumper edition of the Australasian Bulletin of Ecotoxicology and Environmental Chemistry. So go and have a look at that. It's a valuable resource, we hope, for anyone that wants to start their own tropical ecotox lab. So the other thing that, the other benefit of all these toxicity estimates that we derive, they end up being used in derivation of national default guideline values. For the uranium one, when it gets out, it's mostly our species. So it's important to share this data around. So that's our effects side of things, how we measure effects. This is how we monitor exposure, but there's also a bit of effects monitoring in here. We have our in situ, in the stream toxicity test with some snails. So we hang them in the creek and we measure their egg production to see if there's been any unnoticed contamination that might not be picked up by these sondes. So they measure electrical conductivity, turbidity, and pH. Electrical conductivity is a very good surrogate for the salty mine water that would be actively discharged by the mine. So we can help them, we can flag when they're perhaps getting a little bit over the limit by accident and ask them to turn off taps, and that's happened in the past. So we've got a very good relationship between EC and magnesium concentration, so we can use that to compare to our ecotox derived guideline values and limits. And here we have an event-based sampler. So that's to measure the other potential metals that might be coming off. So if we have an alarm for EC, then it will take a sampler. I wanted to note, this is an older model. It doesn't meet the current WHS standards, and I did find a picture of a new one. So we have crocodile fences around these now, and you'll see there's been modifications over the years. We need to make sure that they equipped for the big flows. We've had them overturn in big floods in the past, and it's not good to lose your data when all the action's happening. So these are very robust and safe units nowadays. So this is our monitoring site. So this, I think this is the first picture I've shown of Ranger. So aerial picture of Ranger, you can see the two creeks that run alongside it. And we've got both upstream and downstream monitoring stations that we're measuring these parameters. That's where those pontoons actually lie, is at those sites. So we have the limits there that we derive with ecotoxicology tests, and we measure water in real time, or so we measure the EC of the creek in real time to make sure that those limits are met, and we use the event-based sampling to look at the metals. So the metals are only really going to come out in association with the salty mine water. So when the electrical conductivity jumps, then we can grab a sample and have a look at it. And these are concentrations of uranium. I just wanted to show that, you know, they're well below the limit for uranium. And it's all telemated. We get text messages and we can talk to the mine about actions after that. So what I want to show with this is that all this work is in alignment with the national best practices that are within the ANZG Water Quality Management Framework. The first few steps there about, that's how we use our ecological risk assessments to address that. We've got effects down here in 4 and 5, steps 4 and 5, and that's our water quality objectives, our ecotox testing. So they're the benchmarks for you know, determining what's too much. We've got exposure assessments through those pontoons and at the monitoring we do. For rehab, we'll use modelling to do the exposure assessment. And here's where we can look into mitigations and adaptive management. So I just wanted to show that there's a reason that this is aligned. Is we've worked alongside the teams that have developed these water quality guidelines. We've used our leading practices to say to them, hey, this works. And Ranger is actually a case study within the ANZG website. So if you want to understand how to assess a point source discharge from a uranium mine or any other mine or any other point source, there's some guidance on that website. So through what we've done and learnt over the last decades of monitoring the Ranger mine, we've loaned that to the rest of the country through this process, and through these teams discussed, you know, how to do it best, and we've contributed to these national framework for water quality. So here's a look at all the different things that we do for, and I've gone through our water quality monitoring. So that's all our early detection work. But down the bottom here, we've got the biodiversity assessments. So that's to look at the chronic, long-term responses. We do that on an annual period during the recessional flow. And that has the aim of, you know, we've done our predictions in the lab, we've measured, you know, chemistry, but we want to really assess if there's long-term impacts to the off-site environment. So we've also used those field surveys to validate our laboratory-derived water quality objectives. It's not always easy. There's not a lot of contamination coming from the site. So for magnesium, we were able to do that in some of the on-site billabongs, but it's how we use the field studies to confirm those lab studies. So we look at, and for many decades, we've looked at fish and macrovertebrate communities, sorry, I've just noticed the time, and I've got a fair bit to go. So, so we've got our water quality objectives now, and they will become the rehab standards. But what we really want to look at for the future is the long-term monitoring that will be in place after decommissioning. So what we're currently looking at is our future research efforts. They're really aimed at providing rapid, accurate, simple and safe monitoring tools that we can use by the Indigenous rangers, such as the Duraboo rangers that are out at ERA. So this is what we've been doing with macroinvertebrates. We go to 4 different streams around the area. We look at controlled and exposed sites. We sort them and we identify them to family level. But in the future, what we want to do is look at using DNA, eDNA to actually characterize these species. We are building a database now so that we can identify those species, but we're going to be looking for rapid species level identification of the macroinvertebrates. We've used eDNA to assess other difficult parts of the ecosystem, such as groundwater sediment. We're going to get into soils, but we can also use it to look at some of the things that we don't look at, like the lower trophic levels. So we've also, for many years, monitored fish and the vegetation of these billabongs. We've done it through, there's 2 different types of billabongs, the channels and the shallow lowland billabongs. So we've had these traditional monitoring practices such as the bubble boat for the channels, but we've decided some time ago they were deemed too unsafe because of these big lizards in our environment. So we've gone to a video-based method. So basically we're dropping cameras, GoPros in the stream. It has some benefits, permanent record of what we're seeing, reduction in resources as well. And we get these pretty good metrics, new metrics, and they just keep improving as the cameras get better. Costs are going down, quality of videos are going up. Look, I might just skip through these. These some of the just what we do for the billabongs. I'll skip that too. So the other thing we're getting into is drones and drone imagery. We used to pull out the vegetation and weigh it and identify it and things like that. Now we don't really want to get into the billabongs anymore because of the croc hazard. So what we're doing is using, in this case, it's multispectral bands to actually look at the different types of vegetation. So we lose some information by using drones. We hope to improve that over time using hyperspec and things like that and identifying species a bit more specifically. But at the moment we can look at the different main groups and we can get the whole billabong, which is different to the small plots that we used to do. So we can look at those submerged, emergent and floating types of vegetation and monitor them over time. So my friend next door, Renee, she is right into drones. She's got one of the best drone programs in the country, so much so she's been immortalised as a cartoon character. But they're doing some great stuff, and this is for the terrestrial ecosystem restoration, the trees that will be grown on the waste rock. So they're looking for methods to be able to do community composition, demographics, phenology, physiology, and things like that. And it's about scale for them, being able to assess the whole site at once, but also there's the WHS risk. They use LiDAR, hyperspec, multispec, and they've also got a thermal camera. This is their fleet. These things, I wish you could see them at scale, but some of them are rather large, the M600. But we're pretty happy with this new one. This is our VTOL. Hopefully it streams over the internet. Oh, no, go. No, it doesn't want to play. Oh, I've got to play. So that's our vertical takeoff and landing. And so this is a GoPro sitting on the ground, sitting underneath it. So it takes off like a helicopter. It flies. It's got huge range. We can do lots of area with this piece of kit, and it can carry a bigger payload than most things. And this is why we need it. So we're moving from small scale, where you can get sort of effects, to a whole of sites type scale. So that's at up to 500 hectares of land in a single run. We've got a top-class, world-class radiation monitoring program. Everyone always asks me about radiation. We do measure radiation in all the potential exposure pathways, dust, water. The Bush Tucker program is world-class. We use that for dose assessments for humans and non-human biota, as the radiation people like to call them. I especially like aquatic non-human biota. But that Bruce database has been published. It's the most comprehensive tropical concentration ratio data set in the world. We have contributed this to IAEA projects, and we also lend our expertise, radiation expertise, to reviews under the EPBC Act, and going forward we expect to be involved in the National Nuclear Waste Facility. AI, sorry, so much stuff going on. So we got this project at the moment with Microsoft. We've collected all these hours of video, and they came along and they've helped us use deep learning to actually identify our species. So what we can do now is feed it through these AI models, and we can see it can pick up fishes and identify them to a certain degree. So what we're really looking for at the moment is, you can see we've got some good identification for that catfish there. It can spit out a bunch of data of the fish. But what we've got is built this database with Microsoft. We've called it BruvNet, and we're looking for people to label our fish. And we're also looking for people to contribute to BruvNet with labeled images so that we can train these AI models. If you're interested in that, let me know and we can put you in touch. But if you want to identify fishes, we've got plenty of them. So I'm sorry for the bit of a rush at the end there. So we've been for 40 years protecting the Alligator Rivers Region from uranium mining. And we've been doing that by developing and using leading edge tools and technologies. So over time, these leading edge things become best practice and then standard practice. And the current tools and technologies that we're doing today, we believe that's the way they will go. So at the moment, we're looking at our eDNA, our drones, and our AI and cloud computing for our image and data analysis. Look, these will assist environmental outcomes, but we've got so much interest from other parties coming in at the moment. You know, parks and conservation, agriculture and biosecurity is certainly interested in things like being able to identify a fish to see if it's a species that shouldn't be coming into the country. And there's also, of course, water resources management and wastewater management that are interested in our tools and techniques. Just like to say thanks. Of course, this is not me. This is all these people, these wonderful people in my team, but also Renee Bartolo, who's the team leader of the ecosystem restoration and landform, and Shay and Scott and the radiation team and things like that. And a whole bunch of other people that I work with. I'm sorry I don't have a bit more time. And we've done a lot of work with collaborators. And thank you to all our collaborators. Hopefully not too many are listening right now and get upset with me that I had to skip over this slide so quickly.